there was this boy, and he was about 9 years old, and he came from a broken family. He was actually a foster kid when I met him. And we were talking about listening to God and how people can individually connect with God, and he just wasn't having any of it. He was completely refusing that it existed, that God was real, that it was possible, and he just was completely rejecting it. And one of us was doing a talk from the front about how we have had labels slapped on our hearts and our minds, and other people have judged us and told us who we are for so long that we begin to believe these horrible labels. And we led some ministry suggesting that you can ask God what label has been put on you, or you can show God the label, and he would take it off and show you something that he sees in you of who you really are. He would remove that label and show you who you really are. We led ministry and everything was great, and this child just sat there with a stony face. And at the end, he came up to the shack at the back, which was our prayer ministry venue. And he came back and he said he wanted to do that. He wanted to do that now. He wanted to do the label thing. And so I sat down with him and I explained to him all about what prayer ministry was and what's going to happen now. And I prayed. And he closed his eyes, and as I prayed and asked God to meet with him, his eyes snapped open almost immediately. And he said, I heard from God, I heard from God. And I was like, that's great, what happened? And he said, I showed God my label. And he told me all about his labels, that he was worthless and useless, and he was pointless, and all of these labels. And he said he just showed God his heart that was covered in all of these labels. And then God removed them all. And then he saw right in front of his eyes, when his eyes were closed, right in front in his brain, he said it was just explosions and fireworks. And he saw the word wonderful. God thinks I'm wonderful. And he started to cry and cry and cry. And this 9-year-old boy sat with God for about 20 minutes as I sat next to him. And he met with God, and God ministered to his heart. And he had this massive moment with God, all through prayer ministry, just through him being willing to come and having a leader to be able to sit with him and help him break through into that connection. This session is about how you can do prayer ministry with children. Sometimes it will be about heart hurts. Sometimes it will be about whatever is bugging their mind or stressing them out. Sometimes it will be something broken in their body or something hurt on their body. Whenever a child needs to meet with God and needs help, we're going to give you the tools that you need to do that. Whether it's in a shack at the back, whether it's on the side of a venue, whether it's in your small group, whatever you are and wherever you are, I want you to feel equipped and empowered to just help this child meet with God. You'll notice that I refer to prayer as chat and catch. And so when I talk to children about chatting to God and catching his answer, it's my way of redefining prayer for kids so that it's less focused on a passive listening and more focused on a heart connection of chatting to him and catching his response with their whole bodies. On this DVD, there's another session all about chat and catch and how to teach chat and catch and how to establish chat and catch in your ministry. So I'm not going to go into it here, but just so you know, that's why I'm saying the words chat and catch when I refer to prayer with kids. Prayer ministry is for us to help children connect with God, not to make them reliant on us. So often in children's ministry, we have a massive heart for our children. We want our children to meet with God. We want them to know God. We want them to be full of everything that God has for them. And we so want them to do that we end up inserting ourselves into their relationship with God. A very long time ago, in the Israelite days, God wanted to live among his people. And so we all know the story. He told them to build a tabernacle, and he moved into the tent, and people came to meet with him. And he set up this structure, this way for his people to connect with him. And in the tabernacle and later in the temple, there was a process. There was a series of courts. There was this initial court where people could come, anybody could come, and women. There was another court where only men could come and bring their sacrifices. Then there was another court where only the priests could go, where they did all the sacrificing and they lifted up things to God. Then there was a building where inside of that there was the specific place for the priest to minister before the Lord. And behind that veil, there was the Holy of Holies, God's bedroom, really. It was a place where God's presence rested on the Ark of the Covenant, the mercy seat. And once a year, one man, the high priest, was able to go behind the veil and meet with God face to face to atone for the sins of the nation. Once a year, one person went from the outer court to the inner court, to the inner court, to the very Holy of Holies, face to face, spoke to God, and came out from God's presence to speak to the people. He was their go-between. He was the high priest. He was the one that brought the people to the Lord and brought the Lord to the people. And I'm so grateful that when Jesus came and died on the cross and rose again, that veil was torn, and we, every one of us, now have access to that presence of God that only this high priest had. But so often as children's ministers and children's leaders, we reinsert ourselves into that high priest role for our children. We so want them to connect with God, and we so want God to connect with our children, that we put ourselves in the middle of it and try to make it happen. And with prayer ministry, we're responding to a child's need. A child wants to meet with God, and we want to help them meet with God. And it's so important that we don't shove ourselves in the middle of it and say, let me interpret God for you, and let me tell God what you need, and be in the middle of it. Their relationship with God is their relationship with God. And as we enter into prayer ministry, we need to remember that we are not the high priest who is the gatekeeper and the conduit for God's voice. We are the steward that steps out of their relationship with God and gets to bring a child to God, make space for God, and we get to watch over that encounter. We get to protect it, make it feel safe, make sure a child feels comfortable in knowing what's going to happen. They meet with God on their own, face to face, because that's what Jesus bought for them. And then we walk away with the child, saying, how was that? What was that like? And we get to spend time with that child, helping them learn how to better go back and forth with God. So with that in mind, that our role is to empower and equip a child to meet with God on their own, with us stewarding it and encouraging the child. Let's look at the model. Prayer ministry with children can be different than prayer ministry with adults for several reasons. One, the children are smaller and therefore needed explained more. They also are less experienced in this. And often you're dealing with a different range of people in prayer ministry. You're often dealing with a lot of very unchurched kids. You're dealing with a wide variety of kids' experience. And the model needs to be easy and clear for everybody. It's also helpful to remember that often they don't get exposed to much prayer ministry in general, in the main sessions or in community. And so they don't know the ways to do it. For adults, we know exactly how to receive prayer ministry. We know how to sidle on up and do the sort of sheepish look and explain what you want prayer for, and then get into your position, and then they pray, and you know how to make your noises, yes, yes, so that they know they're on the right track. And then as you have a great time with God, they keep praying over you, and you can zone out or zone in as you want, and you feel very in control, and in the end you know how to end it. You know how to go, yes, no, thank you, that was great, no, it was really great, and you know how to walk away. A child doesn't know how to be in that receiving position often, and we need to help coach them through it so they don't feel that prayer ministry is something that is done to them, but it's something that they powerfully ask for, they're in control of, and they walk away because it's their relationship with God that they own. So this model is really simply to help us make sure we're honoring and respecting their relationship with God, and that we're positioning ourselves in a stewardship place and giving ourselves the opportunity to encourage and empower their relationship with God and help them debrief their encounter. So there's simple steps, and I'm just going to talk through them really quickly. And as we talk them through, don't get too worried about how many steps there are and what they mean and ticking them off. I just want you to get the heart and the process behind it so that you can approach it well. And if your heart and mind and approach is right, then it's okay if you miss a step or if it doesn't quite work in the way that I said, because your goal is the same. So I'm going to explain the model, and then we're going to have you try it with each other. This model should work wherever you do prayer ministry, whether it's in a shack at the back venue where the children have to self-select to go into it, or whether it's just a child grabbing you at the end of a session, or in a small group. I would suggest that it's the same model that's just adjusted a little bit. The first step is to understand what the child wants prayer ministry for. Now, this sounds a lot simpler than it sometimes is, because children will say what they want prayer ministry for, and sometimes they're unclear. Sometimes they mumble, and after the third time you're like, okay, I'm just gonna guess what you want prayer ministry for. Other times they want something so complicated, or something that you're not 100% sure is theologically accurate, and so they have things like, I really feel sad that my dog died and I would like God to give me a horse because that's what makes me happy. And you're like, okay, I understand that that's what you think you need. I also understand that I think you're feeling lonely inside, and you need to understand the both sides of it. Sometimes a kid comes back and says their sibling is really, really ill, and they want God to heal them, which is great. And you're understanding that they want to see God move in power, but they're also experiencing some fear and worry themselves. Everything that they want, they have those two aspects, what they're asking for and what there's a heart underneath it. Some things are just really raw and you get only the heart, and they don't even know what they want for. And it's all right. It just means that you need to really delve to understand. It doesn't mean you head into a counseling session and try to understand all the bits of who said what to who and why they did it and who's wrong. It just means that you really understand not only what they want prayer for, but what is the heart underneath it. The second thing we do is explain what's going to happen. Now, after a child is used to prayer ministry for a while, you can drop this thing. Kids will often go, oh no, once you get to the place where they know what it's about. But at the beginning, they really need to know, because there are a lot of factors. There are 3 people in this prayer ministry experience, and for them to feel safe and comfortable, they need to know what is expected out of all of them. So when you explain, in a second, I'm going to ask you to put your hands out and get comfortable. And then I'm going to put my hand on your shoulder and I'm going to chat to God. And then we're going to wait and be quiet. And God is going to talk to you, and God is going to give you things, and you can chat to God in your heart. And you and God have this time, and it's going to be quiet to your ears, but you and God in your hearts are going to be chatting. And then after a little bit, I'm going to check in on you and see how it's going. When you explain what's about to happen, a child not only knows what you're going to do, you're going to put your hand on the shoulder, you're going to stay there, and you're going to check in later. They know what's expected of them. My job is to get comfortable and get ready to catch from God. And then when it's quiet, my heart talks to God. And then I just keep talking to God until you check on me. And they also know what God is going to do, which is a really important factor for children. God often is the unknown factor in this. They have in their head God, but this often is one of their first encounters with him, and they don't quite know what he's going to do. Is he going to slap them in the face or make their body do weird stuff, or is he going to be absolutely silent and you have to beg him? And so it's really important that we tell children, God is going to do this. God is going to talk to you. God is, if a kid looks nervous, you can say, God is gentle, don't worry. He's not going to push himself. All you need to do is catch, and he's just going to whisper to you. And you just tell children what God is going to do so they know what to expect from him. And once they know what everyone's going to do, then the process feels much more comfortable. They also know when it ends. Because if you've ever had prayer ministry for you, you know that at some point you're done and they're not, or they're done and you're not, and there's this awkward who ends the thing. And it's really important for children to know how it's going to end so they don't feel that they're a hostage or that you're a hostage. It's just really helpful to know that. So once you understand what they want prayer ministry for, you explain what's going to happen, then you just ask, could you touch their shoulder? Now, body position is quite helpful when we get to the touch thing, and it really depends on where you are. I ask them to sit on the floor or sit on a chair. often because when the Spirit comes and they start chatting to God, they sometimes can get a bit wobbly. Sometimes that's just because their eyes are closed and they're losing their balance. Sometimes it's because God is doing something in them. And I never want them to focus on what's happening to their body or what's happening in their surroundings. So I find if I just ask them to sit first or sit on the floor, it makes it a lot easier. It also means I can put my body in a position that isn't threatening to them. If I'm sitting on the floor, I make sure I'm to their side, not right in front of them, too intense. If we're standing up, I make sure I'm sort of on the side, so I face them to the wall, so nobody's looking at them. But I'm also looking at the room to make sure they're not going to get hit in the head with a ball or something like that. It's just putting yourself in a place that makes the child feel protected from the world and private, while also being really open and able to see what's happening around them to protect their time with God. So when you're in a position, that's great. Just ask, do you mind if I touch your shoulder? Sometimes they say no, totally okay. Touching the shoulder is important, I find, because when a child closes their eyes, then they lose where you are and they get quite insecure. So they often do a lot of peeking if you're not touching them, because they're not sure if you've walked off, if you're chatting, if you're having a conversation. So the shoulder is not just scriptural in terms of praying for someone, but it also adds confidence and comfortability to the child to know that you're right there, you're not going away, you have all the time in the world. It's just a good communication tool as well. And then you pray. Now, this I found the hardest when I began. My value for when I pray is I want to frame for the child and for God what this situation is about. So while I want to pray for what the child has asked for, I also want to bring in that heart of understanding that we have and just help the child position themselves to God. It's not so that I can do the praying for them. It's not so that I can pray for the child. Often we get into that. So we feel like we need to, this is when I can pray for the child. God give them this, God give them that. This is what's happening. I pray that God would help you and bless you. And we get into almost a selfish mode of us wanting to pray for them instead of us wanting to step out of it and give them an encounter. Praying for the kid is great. It's just helpful to think of them as two different things. So in this circumstance, when we're doing prayer ministry, we're not looking at praying for the child and using all of our words to cover the child and to give them everything from God. What we're doing is stepping out, and our prayer is just to help this child introduce and start off with God, and then we back out. So my encouragement to you, well, my rule really is no more than 3 sentences. Which is much, much harder than you think. No more than 3 sentences. I don't care if his dog died, his dad left, his mother's hair fell out, their house is moving, and he lives on the street. No more than 3 sentences, because otherwise they become really dependent on us speaking to God for them. And I never want a child to become reliant on me for their connection with God. And so I phrase it in 3 sentences. If all of that stuff is happening, I would say, God, Susie's life is going crazy right now, and her heart is hurt and worried and scared. Holy Spirit, come and meet with Susie and give her everything she needs right now. That's it. Once you do your 3 sentences, then is wait. You've prayed, and now you wait. And we wait. And I would say we wait for at least 30 seconds. 30 seconds is a good rule of thumb, just a good measure to discipline ourselves to wait on God. Now, if they're under 5, 6, I would suggest you shrink that time to say 10 or 15 seconds. But anything over 6 or 7, I would say 30 seconds at least. At least. And this isn't at least. Sometimes when you have older children or you have kids who are really meeting with God, you'll wait 2 minutes, 5 minutes. I've been there for 45 minutes. It completely is up to what God is doing with the child, but at least 30 seconds. And as you're waiting, it's absolutely quiet. And in your head, yes, you are screaming to God, God, meet with them. Come on, God, give them everything. Meet with them. This is his first time. Don't disappoint him. God, speak clearly. And your brain's going, God, please, you better do this. You better do this. And in your face is calm and happy, and you're keeping your eyes open, and you are just watching this child meet with God and making sure they don't get whacked in the head by a running child. It is important to keep your eyes open and to not only watch the surrounding area so you can head off children who are running up to talk to the child or to run up and balls flying everywhere, but it's also important to watch what's happening with the kid. Sometimes the child starts crying. Sometimes the child has opened his eyes and is seeing something from God. Sometimes God is just really heavy on them and is talking to them so much that their bodies begin to respond and react, and sometimes they slump or fall over, and all of that is totally normal and okay. It's just really important that you're watching to make sure that you can help facilitate whatever they're doing with God. As the waiting's happening, it's really helpful to know that children don't really care about you. As prayer ministry people and as adult Christians, we know that we got to give some sort of feedback loop to the people who are praying for us. And so we do the ums and the ahs, but we also we also do more with our face. We sort of smile when God's doing something. We focus. We respond more with our bodies with a very small point to sort of be communicating and knowing that we're being ministered to. Children rarely care about you. And so this is totally bored, and this is completely at the throne room of heaven having the most massive encounter they've ever had in their life. And you rarely will see on a child's face what's happening inside of them, and that's okay. When you're watching it during wait, your brain's going, oh my gosh! But I promise you, God is doing things. God is definitely speaking. In Scripture, it says God is constantly speaking. God is meeting with this child, and just because we can't see it with our eyeballs does not mean it's not happening. And so we actually have to just go on faith and wait for the 30 seconds. I just want to give you a flavor of what 30 seconds is, because 30 seconds sounds a lot quicker than it feels, and I just want you to get used to this natural feeling. So I'm going to start it now, and I just want you to experience 30 seconds. It's a lot longer than you think. And I promise you, a child will become very comfortable with that. First couple of times you may need to remind them, but after that they will become very comfortable with that. After we wait, we check to make sure that they're all right, that they're understanding what's happening, to sort of see how it's going. And we ask an open-ended question. How are you doing? What's God been doing? How are you feeling? You want to tell me about it? We can ask any open-ended question that we want, that draws a child into a conversation. Although sometimes when we begin, we start saying, did you hear from God? Did you catch from God? What did you catch from God? And we end up implying that there's a success or fail. So did you catch from God? The answer can be no, and then they just feel like they failed. And there's no failing in prayer ministry. There's just a moment where you and God met. And sometimes you totally understand what just happened. And sometimes you don't feel a thing and you have no idea. But either way, you met with the God of the universe. And so when we check in, we are just seeing how it's going, to get the child to say how it's going, what's happening, what's God doing. I can't tell you when to check in. You will know. And I can only just tell you with confidence that you will know when to check. After your 30 seconds are over, I just begin to ask God, now when do you want me to do it? I watch their faces, I see when. And at some point, you do just have to interrupt and say, how's it going? And when I started, I was really nervous about this because I didn't want to interrupt the Holy Spirit. I didn't want to interrupt what was happening with the children. I didn't want to knock them off this very precious, tenuous encounter. And I began to have to trust that God is bigger than my little interruption and that God wants to meet with this child. And so often I have said, how's it going? And I've had kids going, shh, Jesus is talking. And I'm like, fine, you stay with Jesus. I have heard say, shh, not yet. Or they'll tell you that they're not ready yet. Or they'll ask to go back to it later. So it's absolutely fine. Feel confident that you do the best you can with listening to God and watching their faces. And at some point, you just check in with them and see how it's going. After the check, we offer, do you want to go back and spend more time with God, or are you all done? So they know that they have the total option to go back and do this more and ask for more, and I'll sit here for hours with you and let you spend time with God. Or they are done and they go away and they feel like they can say that they're done without needing to hurt your feelings or make you feel like they're trying to get out of it. And we really need to give freedom to the kids to say to stay or go. Now that you've heard the model, and it's quite a simple model, understand, explain, touch, pray, wait, check, and offer. Once you know that model and you begin to get used to this flow, it's going to get easier. But right now, we need to start somewhere. And so I'm going to ask you to get into groups, probably of 3 or 4. And one of you is going to pray, and one of you is going to receive prayer. And the other one is going to watch and sort of help provide feedback afterwards. Now, each person will have a chance to pray, and each person will have a chance to receive, and each person will have a chance to watch, so that you'll be able to experience the model and get smoother and smoother at it. During this exercise, I want it to be as real as possible. This isn't us pretending to do prayer ministry with children. This is us doing prayer ministry in a different model. And so if you are doing the praying, don't treat the person as if they are a child. If you are receiving the prayer, don't make up something that you think a child would do and act like a child. This is you as a real person having stuff in your life that you would like prayer ministry for, being ministered to by someone in a prayer ministry for children model. So this is supposed to be real. You will absolutely encounter God in this moment. And as you go through this process of praying and being prayed for and watching, just begin to think of what that would look like on a Sunday morning and how it feels to receive prayer in that kind of model, how it feels to do ministry in that model, so that you can really begin to reflect on our practice as well as beginning to get used to this model of doing prayer ministry. I hope that was a really interesting experience for you to pray in a different way and receive in a different way. There are a couple of questions that often come up at this point after you've experienced it and tried it. One of which is, what do we do if as we are praying for a child, we receive a word or a picture to give them? As adults in prayer ministry, we often do this. This is quite an adult model that we do, that as we're praying, we're getting words and we then just speak the words. And as we're listening to God, we just sort of do this free, flowy, constant prayer of us listening to God and speaking it over people and listening to God and then praying into that. And we have a much more active, constant, fluttery way of doing prayer ministry as adults. And so if we're supposed to be absolutely quiet, what do we do when we get words and pictures for the child? Well, several things. First of all, I would really encourage you to hold them in while it's happening. There's only been 3 times in the past 5 years that God has told me to interrupt a child's time with God and speak the word then. Only 3 times in 5 years. The other times, I have just kept it in for several reasons. One, God is speaking to that child. So if I put myself in the middle of it, I'm leaping into my high priest role again. Second of all, it's their encounter. And God is speaking to him what God wants to speak to this child. And it's not my place to go, how was that experience with God? What was God doing? And the child tells me. And then I go, well, technically that was substandard because I heard also from God. And this is what I heard for you. So, you add that to what you think. It almost comes across as a judgment to the child when we say, that's great, I heard a picture too. And this is what it was. It was like we've butted in alongside the child and said that we heard too, just like you did, I heard too. And it makes the child feel that there was 3 of us in this experience instead of 2. And so I would encourage you that if the Spirit is telling you to do it, absolutely do it. I'm not saying don't. But I'm saying if at all possible, if you could hold it in and then write it down on a piece of paper and come back to them the next week, come back to them an hour later, find them after church, find them at the end of the holiday club and say, when we were praying, and I've been praying for you since, and God dropped a picture in my mind that I think might be helpful to you, and then give it to them. So instead of instead of butting our way into their encounter in that moment, we're saying, you're so important to me and God thinks you're so important that he dropped something in my mind too, and I just want to add this in. You consider it as you go. You add it into your journal. You do whatever you want with it. But I just wanted to let you know that God thinks you're amazing and talk to me about you as well as talking to you in the past couple of hours or something. It just means that they then feel that they had an encounter with God. They own that encounter with God. And you like them too, and God talks to you about them behind their back at other times. It just really preserves and reinforces their encounter. Another question that comes up is, what do we do with their words and pictures? We check on them and they say, oh, it was great. I saw a picture of me giving... There was one kid, I loved it. She had a picture of herself giving money to people in Africa, dropped in her mind, clear as day. And so I said, what's God been doing? She said, he gave me a picture of me giving money to people in Africa. I said, that's great. She said, what does it mean? And everything in me wanted to go, well, maybe you should give money to people in Africa. I just wanted to interpret the picture for her. It's easy. It was obvious. But if I had done that, then I put myself right in the way of me needing to interpret God for her. And so I ended up saying, I don't know. Why don't you go back and ask God? And she was like, oh, can I do that? I was like, yes, absolutely. And so she went back and asked God what the picture meant. And God told her it means that she should go give money to people in Africa. And she was so excited that God gave her a picture. And then when she went back to him, he talked to her about the picture. Sometimes we forget that we can just refer kids back to God, so they come out confused or not quite sure with a picture they don't understand, and we help them figure it out, and then we go away instead of going, well, if it's unclear, God's still right there. Why don't you go back and have a chat with him? And so if they come out with a picture that they don't understand, I would suggest you refer them back to God. Say, why don't you just take some time and ask him now? If they don't want to, or if it's a picture that they're really struggling with, in terms of they really want to understand, but God's just not telling them about it, then I just say, why don't you write it down on a piece of paper or draw a picture and put it in your journal? Now, in my children's ministry, we have journals for children to write their words and pictures in so they can keep them together. But you can just give them a piece of paper if you don't have that and say, why don't you write it down? And I would suggest that you think about it and you pray about it and you come back to it, and we can decide what that means and what God is saying through that. Now, discernment comes up as well, because obviously not every picture that drops in their mind is from God. Not every picture that they see or every word that they have is absolutely from God. We have to be discerning with it. And that's part of the process of check, is so that we can check in and make sure that they're comfortable with what is popping into their mind, and we can help them learn that they have to hold up everything that we think God says up to Scripture and what we know of God, and up to the fruit of it. So for me, I say, does this sound like God? Can I find something like that in Scripture? Does that sound like what he would say? But also, what's the fruit of that? How does that picture make you feel? Does that bring all of the blessing of God's voice, that encouragement and hope and knowledge of God better, or does that bring fear and terror and scariness to your life? And if it's bringing fear and terror or scariness, or if it just doesn't match with what we know of God, then we just crumple it up and throw it away. It doesn't get to stay in your head. We're learning how to hear his voice better and better, and it's a process of learning to recognize his voice. And sometimes we get it wrong, and sometimes we get it right, and the more we get it right, the more we're going to learn how to recognize it better. So this thing right here that terrifies you, make you scary, it's not part of it. And another question I get is, what happens if the kids just get stuck? What if they are listening to God and just can't catch anything, just are feeling left and devoid and just have repeatedly tried over and over again? There's always a way forward. First of all, I would ask to make sure the kid wants to pursue that now, because sometimes I'll do prayer ministry with kids and I'll say, what was God doing? They say, I don't know. And I say, well, tell me about it. What was it like? What way were you catching with? Were you catching with your mind or your body? And I remind them of all the different ways to catch, just because sometimes they're so focused on getting a picture that they're completely missing out that God's giving them peace. But if they're really getting stuck and they're like, I don't know, I didn't feel anything. I didn't hear anything. I was just like, And I'll say, okay, well, God was talking to you. And sometimes it's okay if we don't actually know what happened, because we know that God was in the room with us and God was doing what we asked him to do. He's a faithful God. And so in some ways you can just assure kids that it's okay. Just because you didn't know what God was doing doesn't mean he wasn't doing it. One of the tools is to ask the children what it feels like when they get stuck. Are they feeling like they're in a bubble with God? Are they feeling like there's a wall between them and God? Or do they feel like God is really far away? Do they feel like their voice got stuck and they have no voice? What does it feel like? And when you give them options like this, it means they can begin to find a language for what they're talking about or what it feels like. And then you have a place to go with that. So if they feel like they're in a bubble, then I can say, well, that's not God's will. We can just ask God to pop the bubble. And so we'll pray and I'll ask God right now, God, can you pop the bubble that makes Johnny feel that he's separate from you? And we'll wait and God will pop the bubble, and then we'll ask God a question, and then God can speak and we can continue on. If it's a wall, you can ask loads of questions about the wall. Who made the wall? What's the wall made out of? What do you want God to do with the wall? Sometimes kids say, I made the wall. And then I can say, well, do you want to take the wall down, or do you want to take the wall halfway down? And we can have lots of conversations about what the wall is and what it's made of and why. And some kids make the wall because they're afraid that God's going to overwhelm them. So we ask God to just take out a couple of chunks of the wall so that God can talk to them through there, so they can understand that God is a graceful and patient God. All of those different things. You can have a conversation around the sort of imagery of how it feels when they get stuck. Another tool we have found really helpful is asking God a sequence of questions. Sometimes the ultimate passive, just talk to me, God, doesn't quite work for children who are finding that they're struggling because their brain fills up with stuff and then they can't sift through it. And so sometimes it's helpful to just begin to ask God a series of questions that we get ready and catch his answer to. So we ask God, show me a picture of how you see me. And we wait a little bit. And then we ask God another question. God, show me one of your favorite stories of you in the Bible. And God will drop something. And you can just ask question after question after question. What was the favorite thing you did today, God? God, show me an animal that you really like. Whatever question, just a series of questions about themselves, about God, about the world, about how God feels about their parents, whatever you want. But the more you do it, that means that there's less pressure on this one catching. And it means that we can ask God a question and listen to his answer. And if we didn't catch that time, we'll ask another one. And so you'll find by the fifth or sixth time, kids are beginning to find God's voice in what that is. And you can remind them that it's easy and that it's light and it'll just drop in your mind. And you don't have to work hard for it. You can remind them of the places where they can catch in their body and in their mind. And it sort of gives them a crash course in catching from God. When you do it over and over again, by the fifth or sixth time, you'll find that they're catching better and better and better and better. And that builds a confidence within them. Stuck is never stuck. Stuck is only stuck as long as the kids want to stay stuck. And so for me, I found that it's not my job to force a child to catch God's voice. It's my job to facilitate whatever they want to do. If they're done, they want to go back, fine. If they just want to have a conversation about it, that's fine. If they really want to pursue it and catch God's voice, that's great. I'll do whatever they want to do, but it's never what I want to do. And I'm never disappointed if they just want to go away and try it again at a different time. Prayer ministry with kids is one of the biggest joys and honors of our ministry. And I really encourage you and pray for you as you begin to do this with your kids, both churched and unchurched. In a different session, we're going to look at some sort of more specifics of prayer ministry. We look at healing and nightmares and some questions that arise as we do it. Sort of, I don't want to say advanced prayer ministry, but it's more training in what this is and what the specifics look like with kids. But even if you only listen to this session, you're going to be fully equipped to do what God is calling you to do next.